Okay, here we are in lecture number 12, and we're looking at the chapter on divisions in our book, Our Lives. And we start off with some vocabulary. The authoritarian personality, someone prone to prejudice, likely to support authoritarianism. And it gives a profile of this person, usually conventional values, accepting of authoritarian structures, aggressive, not self-reflexive, believes in stereotypes. And we can see examples of the authoritarian personality even today in our politics. Your book talks about cognitive dissonance. Now, your book talks about the discomfort that people feel, and here I want to make sure that's in your notes. I want to expand on the book's definition. They talk about discomfort, but I want you to know that it's the discomfort when a person holds two beliefs at the same time, and they're contradictory beliefs. Like it could be, oh, I believe in a certain set of values, but my behavior doesn't. Or I believe in freedom, but I also believe in locking these people up. I think we see a lot of cognitive dissonance often in religion. I believe in, Christianity, but not for immigrants or refugees or people like that. Well, we're going to talk about critical race theory. This is, again, an aspect of intersectional theory where we see race and class and gender coming together. Cultural hegemony. This is a cultural set of values dictated by the dominant group. Cultural power. This is controls over what is right, dictated by the dominant group. And cultural relativism. Now, again, here's another aspect of this that I want you to know that's slightly different than the book. Cultural relativism is basically the belief that you can't really judge another culture by your rules and only by their own set of values and whether they actually live up to those values or not. Ethnocentrism is judging another culture by your rules. Individual discrimination is something that happens against a person by another person. Then there's institutional discrimination against a person by an entire system. So institutional discrimination might be the kind of discrimination that we've seen in, let's say, education, not allowing blacks or Hispanics access to education as a form of institutional discrimination. Racial privilege. And one aspect of this that's important is not seeing race because the system is benefiting your racial groups. When people say, I don't know what you're talking about, my privilege. And it's because it's often easy to skip over how the system benefits your group if you're not being pulled over by the police or not allowed into a school or not given a job. And again, there's also the last one that I want you to point out, stereotype. This is a generalization to all group members that a stereotype exists. So in other words, all blank group members are lazy. All blank group members are thieves or drug dealers. So let's look into a little bit more specifically and evaluate some of these methods of analyzing division. So let's start with critical race theory as a method. Again, this is the intersection of race and gender and class, and looking at how institutions, particularly how institutions are created and their actions propagate continued racism. And again, it's not dependent on people being members of a clan or something like that. It's that if an institution is developed with these ideas initially, then you're going to see racist outcomes in the future. And people will say, well, I don't believe in this, or I've heard all this is bad. Okay, well, think about this. When we're analyzing, let's say, an issue like racial and ethnic issues, and you're like, well, I don't want to follow critical race theory. Okay, well, how do you believe race and ethnic systems and stratification happen? Is it biology? Is it natural? Is it survival of the fittest? When we look at those don't seem to make sense. And all the hype we've heard recently of the past year or so about CRT teaching white kids to hate themselves, or that it promotes violence, or it's actually more racist than white supremacy. Uh, it's ridiculous. It's nonsensical. It's not being taught in schools because, again, it's not even available until you get into college. A course like this, or if you're studying a course in, let's say, law school, where they look at critical race theory as a way to evaluate the behavior and treatment of institutions to different groups. Um, and by not discussing racial and ethnic issues or any of the other minority groups that we're analyzing in our course, we are basically tacitly, quietly being taught that the way it is right now is okay, that it's the best or the only or the natural way. By not being critical and examining how these systems operate, how ideas like race and ethnic or disabled or sex and gender and orientation are being used, we accept the way things are and allow systems like that to continue to propagate. Another way of thinking about, let's say, race and ethnic relationship is something based on colorism. Skin color. This combines symbolic interactionism, where skin tone becomes symbolic, and critical theory. So we have Douglas Massey and Denton found, for instance, that hypersegregation is more likely for blacks than Hispanics, and more likely for Hispanics than whites, except for one group, Puerto Ricans. And their idea was that since many Puerto Ricans have African ancestry and phenotypically can look black, that's why they're more hypersegregated in the United States. They took their theories and analyzed Europe and found, again, European cities also seem to have this colorism, this divide. So, for instance, in London, it didn't matter that, let's say, Jamaican immigrants came between 1948 and 1955. They were still more segregated than, let's say, Indian and Pakistani immigrants that came in the 1970s that didn't speak English. That when they analyzed this in the late 80s and 1990s, they still found that Jamaicans were much more racially segregated in London than these other groups. And again, the issue seems to come back to colorism and color theory. Another theory is what's called caste theory, that basically says a minority group is labeled and treated as a minority, and despite their achievements, no matter what they do, they're not able to progress beyond the idea that they're in this caste. Again, sort of borrowing from South Africa and India, the idea of caste theory. Last theory that we're going to talk about is called split market theory. Again, these four theories are only, CRT is really in your book, so this is for your notes. Split market, labor market theory says the difference in labor payments by black and white workers, starting way back in the teens and 20s, in the beginning of industrialization, has had a lasting effect on cities. So much so that the decline of neighborhoods that are African American in big cities, particularly New York and Pittsburgh, Indianapolis, Chicago, all the way out to Los Angeles, has more to do with years and years of black folks being paid half of what white folks were being paid, which means that they bought only half as good of a house. It only appreciated half as much. The schools were only half as good. And that prolonged situation is one of the reasons that the split labor market has contributed to these divisions in society. And again, we see sort of a parallel with William Julius Wilson's theory, declining significance of race, and when work disappears, that the long-term effect of this is that when industry has left these cities, it's those communities, black communities, Hispanic communities, that have paid the higher cost and are trapped long-term in those sort of spirals of poverty. And again, correlating with Massey and Denton, more likely to be in this sort of, a hole in the city of poverty. So again, to explain Massey and Denton's theory again a little bit closer, their theory says that the difference between white and black poverty is someone in a white census tract that's poor the next census tract over might be Asian and middle class, Hispanic and wealthy. But for African Americans in particular, they're surrounded by other census tracts that are also black, impoverished, with high unemployment and high public assistance rates. And that's what they call hypersegregation. And again, if you look at all these theories, they can sort of all walk hand in hand to help us illustrate the divisions that we see in our society based. A lot of this discussion is on race and ethnicity, but we see, again, all kinds of segregation based on ageism, based on abilityism. Some of that, some have pointed out, voluntary. Sun cities, these are retirement cities with just the elderly in them. But a lot of the segregation that we see is not voluntary and planned, but in fact imposed by the system.